50,000 citizens were sold into slavery. Their city burned for a solid week. This was not war. This was the total annihilation of Carthage, Rome's greatest rival. But this final act of destruction was not the beginning of the hatred, only its inevitable, tragic end. Musho, this is the story of how allies became rivals and how revenge fueled a 100-year war. This cycle of annihilation began with a power that seemed blessed by the gods of Olympus and Jupiter himself. Until the 3rd century BC, the Roman Republic looked like an unstoppable force. It was a vortex of iron and will, pulling all of Italy into its orbit. In a short time, it had seized the entire Italian peninsula with relative ease, a feat that shocked the older Mediterranean powers. Rome had faced down illustrious leaders, men who were legends in their own time. They defeated even the great Pyrrhus of Epirus, a cousin of Alexander, whose costly victories gave birth to the very concept of a Pyrrhic victory. Rome's legions had proven that their flexible formations and relentless manpower could outlast the phalanxes of the Greek world. But power, like nature, abhors a vacuum. Soon Rome, having consolidated the peninsula, cast its ambitious gaze southward. Its attention fell upon the rich, triangular island of Sicily, a crossroads of the Mediterranean. This move, however, would put it on a direct collision course with another Mediterranean power, one that was also at the peak of its own expansion. That power was Carthage. The Carthaginian Empire was a thalassocracy, a power of the sea.
The finest Tyrian
It was a
purple,
magnificent
only 50
commercial empire, a Phoenician jewel that extended its influence across the entire Western Mediterranean. From Spain to Sardinia, from Corsica to the coast of Africa, its trade routes were the arteries of the known world. At its head was the rich, powerful, and ancient city of Carthage, a metropolis that rivaled any in existence. This Phoenician empire was the only rival that could truly make the iron-willed Romans tremble. Their navy was supreme, their wealth seemingly limitless, built on trade and the silver of Spain. And until this crucial point in history, Carthage and Rome had not been enemies. In fact, they had been formal friends. They had established treaties and alliances, recognizing each other's spheres of influence. They shared lucrative trade agreements and even had mutual enemies, such as the Greek adventurers who sought to control Sicily. There was a cautious, pragmatic respect between the two giants. But this stable relationship began to fracture when the Roman Republic started to consider taking Sicily for itself. Sicily was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, a strategic prize of immeasurable value. Tensions, once dormant, quickly began to grow between the two factions, like a hairline crack in a mighty dam. The spark that would ignite the century-long inferno came from an unexpected source. In 288 BC, a lawless band of Sicilian mercenaries who called themselves the Mamertines, or Sons of Mars, seized the strategic city of Messenia. They had been hired to protect the city and instead had betrayed it, taking it for themselves. But after conquering it, they found their prize was a trap. They were soon surrounded by two major military powers, Rome to the north and Carthage to the south, with the Greek tyrant of Syracuse also threatening them. These mercenaries, realizing their predicament, tried to ally with one of the two great powers, seeking protection in exchange for loyalty. They were playing a dangerous game, offering control of Sicily's gateway to the highest bidder. At first, only Carthage responded to the Mamertines' plea for help. The naval power saw its chance. It came to their aid, but with one non-negotiable condition: a Carthaginian garrison must be established in Messenia. This move, while strategically sound for Carthage, was a profound provocation to Rome. One year in, when Rome saw this, its greatest rival now controlling the very strait that separated Sicily from Italy, a fierce debate erupted in the Senate. Many senators were hesitant, wary of getting entangled in an overseas war against a formidable naval power. But the expansionist faction won. Rome decided it too would help the Mamertines and send its own garrison under the command of Appius Claudius Caudex. When the Mamertines, who were Italic peoples themselves, realized that the Romans were on their way, they made their choice. They much preferred Roman aid, sensing a closer cultural tie and perhaps fearing Carthaginian domination more. They forced the Carthaginian garrison, now unwanted, to leave the city. This was a grave insult that Carthage could not ignore. In revenge for this slight, Carthage took a decisive step. It formed an alliance with its former rival, Syracuse, the very power the Mamertines had originally feared. Without much delay, this new and powerful coalition attacked Messenia. As the Roman legions approached the city, Hanno, the Carthaginian commander, alerted all his allies to the threat that Rome posed. The Romans, for their part, had not expected such an aggressive and rapid response. Their move was a gamble, and they now faced a united front. Surprised, the Romans offered a peace treaty to Hanno, but it was immediately rejected. The time for diplomacy was over. At this point, there is an open debate among historians about what happened next. Did the Carthaginians voluntarily withdraw from Messenia to regroup, or did the first clash of arms result in a Roman victory? But whatever the case, with the arrival of Caudex and his legions, Rome planted its standard outside the Italian peninsula for the first time in its history. The First Punic War had begun. With Messenia now under Roman control, the Republic immediately turned its attention to its next target, Syracuse, Carthage's new ally. This time, it would be Manlius Valerius Maximus Messala who would lead Roman troops to Syracuse and lay siege to the city. The ruler of Syracuse, Hero II, found himself in an impossible position. He was incapable of defending his city against the relentless Roman legions, and was unwilling to wait for Carthaginian aid that might never come, or might come at too high a price. When Syracuse capitulated, it agreed to ally with the Romans, abandoning Carthage on the spot. This was a devastating strategic blow to Carthage. In consequence, virtually all the other Greek towns in the surrounding area also surrendered and swore allegiance to Rome, fearing a violent reaction if they refused. Rome had secured a powerful foothold in Sicily. Although this war was destined to be essentially a naval conflict, the Romans, masters of the land, pressed their advantage. They hastened to besiege a key Carthaginian ally, the fortress city of Agragas. This land-based aggression infuriated Carthage, which quickly decided to leverage its strongest point, the sea. Initially, the strategic situation was clear. The Carthaginians had a superior naval force, centuries of maritime experience, and skilled admirals. Rome, by contrast, was a land power. It had no significant navy to speak of. However, the Romans were not deterred by this. They understood a simple, brutal truth. To win this war, they would have to establish their own fleet. And then, in a stroke of good luck, as if Neptune himself were watching over them, the Romans saw a Carthaginian quinquereme warship run aground in the low tide. With astonishing speed and industrial might, they reverse-engineered the vessel, creating copies for their new naval force, but with some innovative additions. One of these Roman improvements was the Corvus, or crow. It was a heavy, movable bridge with a large metal spike on its underside. This bridge could be dropped onto an enemy ship, locking the two vessels together. The Corvus effectively turned a naval battle into a land battle. It allowed Rome's superior legionaries to swarm onto the decks of the Carthaginian ships, bypassing the enemy's superior seamanship. This invention proved to be tremendously effective and helped to level the playing field on the seas, much to the horror of the Carthaginian sailors. With Sicily now practically in their hands, the Romans grew even more ambitious. They began to look towards Africa itself, the homeland of Carthage. Four legions, a massive invasion force, were put under the command of Marcus Attilius Regulus. They landed on the African coast and for the first time arrived at the very gates of Carthage. The city was in a panic, but the Carthaginian defense was bolstered by a Spartan mercenary named Xanthippus. The following year, the conflict resumed in earnest back in Sicily. Rome continued its slow, grinding advance, pushing further and further west. With every passing day, the Carthaginians were being cornered. But the truth was that this war was far from finished. Rome still could not take the entire island. The war was exhausting both sides, draining their treasuries and their manpower. The city of Lilybaeum, Carthage's main fortress, proved to be an unconquerable city, despite the valiant and costly efforts of the Romans to take it. To make matters worse for Rome, the Carthaginians, now adapting to Roman tactics, defeated the Romans at sea in the Battle of Drepana. With momentum on their side, they beat them again shortly after at the Battle of Fintius. The Corvus, it turned out, made the Roman ships top-heavy and unstable in rough seas, costing them thousands of men in storms. Nevertheless, after these battles in 249 BC, Carthage's holdings in Sicily had been reduced to just two cities, Drepana and Lilybaeum. The war had become a stalemate of attrition. While the Romans battered the city walls, desperate to finally free the island from Carthaginian control, a brilliant new Carthaginian general emerged. His name was Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar ambushed the enemy with repeated guerrilla attacks, striking from the mountains and then disappearing, bleeding the Roman supply lines and frustrating their legions. He was a ghost, a master of unconventional warfare. But despite these brilliant attempts, Barca could not hold out against the relentless Roman attacks forever. He was one man fighting against an empire that simply would not quit. And to make matters worse, Rome, despite its losses, rebuilt its fleet. Gaius Lutatius Catulus led a new fleet of 200 ships to Drepana, finally defeating the Carthaginians in the decisive naval battle of the Aegates Islands. This victory cut off Hamilcar and his forces in Sicily completely. The war was lost. Almost bankrupt, exhausted by years of war, and with its armies trapped, Carthage was ready to capitulate and begin peace negotiations. A treaty was finally established, the Treaty of Lutatius. Its terms were brutal. Carthage had to evacuate Sicily completely and pay Rome 3,200 talents of silver over just 10 years, an astronomical sum. This peace agreement was a profound humiliation for the proud Carthaginians. It led to many within Carthage becoming radicalized, embittered, and hungry for a reckoning.
Carthage will have its revenge.
Among them was Hamilcar Barca, the famous and experienced military leader who had been forced to surrender while still undefeated in the field. His hatred for Rome became enormous. His greatest dream, his life's new purpose, was to avenge the humiliation that the First Punic War had brought upon his city. However, this vengeance would not be possible in a short time. Worse, Carthage was immediately plunged into a brutal civil war with its own unpaid mercenaries, a conflict Rome exploited to seize Sardinia and Corsica as well. Therefore, Hamilcar, instead of looking toward Italy, now looked toward the Iberian Peninsula, Spain. Carthage already had several prosperous colonies in Hispania, a land incredibly rich in silver, gold, and crucially, manpower. It seemed logical that Hamilcar would go there to expand Carthaginian influence and independently rebuild a power base loyal to him and his family. He would forge a new empire to fight the old. In doing so, he initially established himself at Gades, modern Cadiz, and from there he gradually expanded, conquering tribe after tribe. Over time, Hamilcar's forces grew, as did the domains of Carthage under his control. Now he was forging a new army loyal to him and funding it with the riches of Spain. However, in 229 BC, Hamilcar Barca died, drowning in a river while covering his son's retreat during a battle. He passed from the world before having the chance to leave Hispania and seek the revenge he so desperately desired. But Hamilcar Barca had a son named Hannibal. He had raised this boy with a burning passion and a hatred for Rome, just as he himself had. This ensured that even after Hamilcar's death, Carthage would remain a bitter enemy of the Roman Republic. Following Hamilcar's absence, a man named Hasdrubal the Fair, Hamilcar's son-in-law, assumed leadership of Carthage's Iberian territories. These domains now covered half of the peninsula, with constantly growing forces. Around 226 BC, Rome, now somewhat concerned and aware of its enemy's expansion in Hispania, took a step. A treaty was signed establishing that Carthage would not expand its military operations beyond the Ebro River. But Hannibal, now a young commander in this new Spanish Empire, had no intention of respecting such an agreement. After all, his father had raised him for one purpose: to be the scourge of Rome. Only a few years after the negotiations between Rome and Carthage, Hasdrubal the Fair was assassinated. Now Hannibal, by the acclaim of the army, took control of Hispania. Almost immediately, he began to push the boundaries, consolidating his power and testing Rome's resolve. However, the straw that broke the camel's back for Rome would be when Hannibal besieged and captured Saguntum in 219 BC. Saguntum was a city south of the Ebro, but it was a friend and ally of the Roman people. In capturing it, Hannibal was stripping Rome of one of its most faithful allies in the region, a direct challenge to Roman honor and authority. The Roman Republic was deeply angered by this. They sent an embassy to Carthage, demanding Hannibal be handed over. The Carthaginian Senate refused. Thinking that this young general, Hannibal, could not be too difficult to defeat, Rome declared war on Carthage in the spring of 218 BC. The Second Punic War had begun. While Rome began its preparations for war, expecting to sail to Spain and deal with Hannibal there, Hannibal was plotting his own, much more audacious plan. He had studied his enemy. He realized that the Roman Republic had a good record of defeating enemies outside of Italy, but perhaps not within. He concluded that if they pursued him in Hispania, he might lose a conventional war. But if he was the one who hunted them, in Italy itself, perhaps then the tables could be turned. He would bring the war to their doorstep. Without wasting much more time, Hannibal led his troops, including his famous war elephants, across the Pyrenees, and then, in a move that shocked the ancient world, across the Alps. Although the path itself would take them only 15 days, it would be nothing short of a nightmare. Hannibal and his forces faced far more setbacks than they had anticipated. The local Gallic tribes were deeply hostile to the Carthaginians, ambushing them in the high mountain passes. The cold was brutal, the paths treacherous. When they finally descended into the Po Valley of Italy, more than half of the troops had died or deserted. However, fortunately for Hannibal, some locals in Italy, particularly the recently conquered Gauls, were very dissatisfied with Roman rule. Seeing this new invader, they began to join the Carthaginian cause. He won the Battle of Trebia, and then in a masterful ambush, he destroyed a consular army at the Battle of Lake Trasimene. The Romans were in disbelief at the situation. They had expected to go fight Hannibal in Hispania, not in their own territory. Nevertheless, the threat was already on their own soil, and so far Hannibal's gamble was paying off. His confidence was growing. It would receive an even greater boost when both sides clashed at Cannae. There, the Carthaginian general won a crushing, almost unbelievable victory. According to the historian Livy, the Carthaginians had 46,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry. The Romans, determined to crush Hannibal once and for all, had assembled 16 legions, an enormous force of about 90,000 men. This was one of the greatest military defeats in Rome's history. It is still considered by historians as a classic example of a victorious double envelopment. Hannibal intentionally allowed his center to collapse, drawing the massive Roman force inward, and then enveloped them with his superior cavalry and infantry on the flanks. The result was not a battle, it was a massacre. Livy describes the following. There were so many thousands of Romans lying, some with their wounds aggravated by the morning cold, as they were rising covered in blood from the midst of the slaughtered mass, were overcome by the enemy. Others were found with their heads buried in the earth, in holes they had dug, having thus, it seems, created their own graves in which they had suffocated themselves. Furthermore, this victory triggered a wave of support for the Carthaginian side among many populations in Magna Graecia, the south of Italy. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, defected to Hannibal. Rome was on its knees. But even with this great achievement, Hannibal was still at a crossroads. If he wanted to continue and march directly on Rome, he would have to do so without any backing. His brother, also named Hasdrubal, was held up in Hispania, fighting a young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio. And no one could help him from Carthage, which was wary of his power and blockaded by the Roman navy. Rome, for its part, though reeling, did not capitulate. Instead, it adopted a policy of total war against Hannibal. To this end, it took the unusual step of appointing a dictator named Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius, aware of Carthaginian military superiority in the field, implemented a new, deeply unpopular, but brilliant strategy. He avoided confronting Hannibal in an open battle. Instead, he kept his troops close to the enemy forces, shadowing them, harassing their supply lines, and picking off stragglers in a war of attrition. This Fabian strategy was a war of calculated delay, designed to wear Hannibal down. Thus, the Carthaginian offensive, lacking siege equipment to take Rome and unable to force a final decisive battle, began to slowly unravel. Furthermore, Hannibal's authority was constantly being questioned. His Italian allies grew weary of the war, and he had no one to help him. His brother Hasdrubal, attempting to break out of Spain and bring reinforcements, was defeated and killed at the Battle of the Metaurus. His head was cut off and thrown into Hannibal's camp, a gruesome message that no help was coming. By 207 BC, all that remained for Hannibal was Calabria, the toe of Italy. Weshroman, the Roman Republic, having learned from its defeats, now controlled the seas, isolating the Carthaginians from any help or supplies. Meanwhile, in Hispania, the young Scipio had defeated the Carthaginian armies, driving them from the peninsula entirely. To make matters worse, many of Carthage's Italian allies were now loyal to Rome again, having seen the tide turn. Taking advantage of this change in the war's direction, the Romans, led by that same Scipio, decided to give Hannibal a taste of his own medicine. They would invade Africa. While Hannibal continued his desperate struggle in Italy, the consul Scipio landed in Africa in 204 BC and began to cause havoc. There, the Romans defeated a Carthaginian force under the command of Gisco. Having now captured enough territory and threatening Carthage itself, they forced Hannibal to finally leave Italy to come to the aid of his homeland. After 15 years on enemy soil, the scourge of Rome was going home. His arrival in 202 BC would set the stage for the dramatic end of the Second Punic War. As autumn approached, Hannibal and Scipio would meet face to face, the two greatest generals of their age. What was said in that meeting, we will never know. However, we do know that an attempt was made to end the war through diplomacy, but the attempt failed. The terms Scipio offered were too harsh for Hannibal. The terms Hannibal offered were too lenient for Scipio. The final battle was set. Carthage and Rome had 35,000 and 40,000 infantry and 6,000 and 4,000 cavalry, respectively. Hannibal also had 80 war elephants, which he hoped would break the Roman lines. But these elephants proved to be more of a hindrance than a help. Scipio, having fought in Spain, had trained his men to deal with them. He ordered his legionaries to blow horns, frightening the beasts, and to open lanes in their formation, letting the elephants charge harmlessly through. Although Hannibal was in numerical superiority at the beginning of the battle, Scipio managed to rout the war elephants.